so a lot of people are noting, commenting about the recent Supreme Court cases. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those things because people are commenting and covering certain ones, but not others. And many legal analysts, including here this comment from Polymarket, say the Supreme Court's latest rulings could make Trump the, quote, most powerful president in generations, end quote. So what has happened in the last week or so is absolutely crazy. So we will cover some of these cases and talk about why it is that this has come out at this particular time. And so if you don't already know, there's a strict annual calendar by the Supreme Court, and the intense internal mechanics of how these rulings are finalized dictates what it is that comes down the pipeline in this annual sort of term. And so one thing that happens is that the most controversial, high-stakes cases simply just take the longest to write. And so it often happens that by late June or early July that these verdicts come out. And so the term begins in the first Monday in October, then they start hearing cases October through April, and then the writing sprint, which happens from May to June. And so by that deadline of around this time, the court must clear its docket before adjourning for the long summer recess, and all remaining decisions are released in rapid succession. So that's why we're seeing a lot of press about some of these cases. And so as early as last week, June 25th, there were several cases. You may have heard about some of these in the news. I'm going to go through all of them. So Monsanto versus Durnell, which was about a federal pesticide preemption case. The court ruled 7-2 that Monsanto is shielded from cancer victims suing over Roundup, finding that federal law preempts states from requiring their own cancer warnings on labels. This was a legal victory for the Trump administration's Justice Department and corporate interests, though it politically complicates the conservative, quote, Make America Healthy Again, unquote, movement's push against pesticides. And then the second case, Wolford versus Lopez. So it's about concealed carry on private property. So it was a ruling by the conservative majority 6-3 to strike down a Hawaii law that required licensed gun owners to get explicit permission before bringing concealed weapons into publicly accessible private properties like stores or restaurants. This represents a massive victory for conservatives and the Second Amendment that advocates seeking to expand concealed carry rights. So those two weren't as much in the news, but again, just small wins in certain areas. The Second Amendment and disclosure and health, those spaces. And then Mullen versus El Otro Ledo about border asylum processing. So in a 6-3 decision, the court ruled that asylum seekers stopped by border agents on the Mexican side of the border have not legally arrived in the U.S. and cannot claim a statutory right to apply for asylum. So this legalization of the metering policy was a monumental win for Trump's hardline border security agenda. And he even quoted a news article from Just the News saying that Supreme Court immigration rulings cement Trump as foremost border security guardian. And then this one was a huge sort of debate in the last week, Mullen versus Doe. So it's about TPS, temporary protected status. So the court's conservative ruling from 6-3 ruled that the Trump administration has the authority to end temporary protected status for migrants fleeing disasters in countries like Haiti and Syria, and shielded those decisions from court review. So this delivered another major victory for Trump's efforts to curb humanitarian immigration programs. So what was seen here was a misuse, an abuse, where even Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen said, let me be abundantly clear, temporary protected status is just that, temporary. Democrats tried to turn this into a de facto amnesty program. President Trump put a stop to it. If you are in the country without status, you are here illegally. Illegal aliens have two choices. They can either accept a $2,600 stipend and a flight home to self-deport, or they will be removed. Now, remember, this program, as you may or may not know, has been abused to allow a lot of people to kind of flood in to keep that status and to just stay here in this limbo state indefinitely. And then it just got even crazier in the last couple days, specifically on June 29th, NRSC versus FEC. It's about campaign finance spending limits. So in a 6-3 ruling, the court struck down federal limits on how much political parties can spend in direct coordination with their candidates, citing the First Amendment. This was a massive financial win for Republicans, allowing them to immediately unleash their substantial fundraising advantage directly into midterm campaigns without a legal ceiling. And then President Trump also said this in a Truth post: the Supreme Court just took restrictions off political spending, a big win for Republicans, and more importantly, the First Amendment. And this is the one that a lot of people are talking about. Number 2, Trump versus Slaughter, about presidential removal power. So the court ruled 6-3 that the president can fire the heads of independent federal regulatory agencies like the FTC at will, overturning 90 years of precedent. This is a historic victory for Trump and the conservative legal movement's long-term goal of dismantling the administrative state and centralizing executive power. And Trump mentions that the biggest and most consequential decision issued by the court by far is the Slaughter case, which overturned the very famous Humphreys executor rule. This whole concept of power has been fought over for nearly 100 years, going all the way back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where a large slice of his power was taken away. He fought to regain it, even wanting to pack the court, but was unsuccessful in doing so. This decision gives tremendous additional power back to the presidency where it belongs. It is an honor to be the sitting president who, after all these years, won this very important and hard-fought case. We had other good victories too, and we also had the Birthright citizenship laws, which we'll talk about here in a second, which we worked to correct in Congress. But the bigger slaughter was Slaughter. The Republican Party was treated very fairly by the U.S. Supreme Court. And again, just throughout the day, he was commenting on this, saying that this was a big win, that this was sought long before by other presidents dating back to the 1930s. And here mentioning 90 years of precedent being completely and unequivocally overruled. And then another message again about this being a monumental ruling. So Trump definitely has tweeted or talked more about this than other ones. So again, this is going to be absolutely huge, especially as more and more of the white hat / deep state battle, all that happens, and we are seeing certain things just come to pass, come to light, and let's see what happened. So the next one, Trump versus Cook, Federal Reserve independence. Despite expanding presidential firing power the same day, the court declined to let President Trump immediately remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook without proper notice. This served as a procedural setback and temporary loss for Trump's efforts to exert direct control over the nation's central bank. And so that was a little bit of a setback and a loss, but no big deal. And then this next one was huge. Mississippi mail-in ballot law, election deadline. So in a 5-4 decision, the court upheld state laws allowing mail-in ballots to be counted if they arrived up to 5 days after Election Day, provided they are postmarked on time. This is a notable defeat for the Republican-led effort to tighten voting windows, as conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined the liberals and Chief Justice Roberts. And President Trump also said that in light of the tremendous loss in the Supreme Court today concerning voters' rights and the fact that people's votes are allowed to be counted long after an election is over, it is more important than ever to pass the Save America Act, which is all voters must show photo ID, identification, all voters must show proof of citizenship, no mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military deployment, or travel. And so he's advocating here that this must be passed differently within the legislative system. And again, he's calling the attention that there's only one reason for this, which is cheating. And remember, like my other video, we mentioned President Trump talking more and more about the communist movement, calling attention to this and their method. So let's see what comes out of it. But again, more attention given to something and more of this fanning the flame so people can wake up to that. And then the Trump versus Eugene Carroll case, I think that was thrown out. The appeal was denied. And so this was that defamation verdict. And then also another defamation lawsuit, the Dershowitz versus CNN. The court declined to hear an appeal from Trump's ally, Alan Dershowitz, seeking to revive that defamation lawsuit. And then on the 30th, there were two other ones. These are huge. Trump versus Barbara, which is about birthright citizenship. So the court actually struck down President Trump's executive order that sought to end birthright citizenship for the children of undocumented immigrants. This 6-3 overall ruling 5-4 on constitutional grounds was a major legal defeat for Trump's immigration agenda, reaffirming the 14th Amendment's long-standing protections. Now, this is where a lot of people had a lot to say. Even here, Justice Alito apparently fuming that this judgment was a huge mistake that will seriously affect the country's future. Now, remember, he's a conservative judge that also ruled on the other side. And then Matt here commenting on a viral post with a lot of comments. So wait. So the Supreme Court basically ruled that anyone from anywhere who came into the country by any means can have a baby in the United States, and that baby is automatically an American citizen. What are we even doing here? That is absolutely insane. And then Awakened Outlaw says, I believe this was the point all along, and as executive order forced their hand. Trump is working to help permanently save the country, something that temporary executive orders don't accomplish. And then MJ Ultra, Truth Ultra says that the better and more permanent solution, a constitutional amendment, 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress and ratification by at least 38 states. This is extremely difficult, and ironically, such a legislative attempt exists right now. The Birthright Citizen Act of 2025, H.R. 569, which seeks to redefine subject to jurisdiction in statute. It was introduced in January 2025 and referred to committee, but has not advanced significantly. So number 2, if above fails, the only other way is the military. President Trump, as the commander-in-chief, has the duty to use full force of the U.S. military to take over. Let's see if that happens or not. And again, some of those methods, even President Trump here tweeting or truthing Trump's efforts to reverse birthright citizenship may succeed with or without SCOTUS. So let's see what happens. And specifically, he says that we can easily make it up in Congress through legislation with the support of the president. That has now been determined during this process. No long and unwieldy constitutional amendment is necessary. Congress should start today to work on ending expensive and unfair to our country birthright citizenship. They will have my complete and total support. And the last big one here is West Virginia versus BPJ about transgender athletes in sports. So this was huge. The court upheld state laws banning transgender girls and women from competing on female school sports teams, ruling that Title IX allows separation based on biological sex at birth. This was a major ideological victory for conservatives and Republican-led states nationwide seeking to restrict transgender participation in sports. President Trump here saying, big win. The U.S. Supreme Court just ruled against men playing in women's sports. Wow, that takes ridiculous situation off the table. Big news. So again, just want to give you guys a summary of some of these cases. I know people are cherry picking and talking about certain ones, but here you can see the clean cut of everything that has happened or been pushed to the very last couple of weeks. So let's see what else comes about, because we still have the early part of July, but just want to give you guys this quick update. I still believe there's a lot of hidden things that we're not seeing behind closed doors, and it's eliciting more than the optics or the public-facing view that we are all seeing. So there's some layers behind this. So you're seeing something being black and white, as in the Supreme Court case has just been coming out, but I think that it was done on purpose. Some of these maybe losses or even the victories, such that other things can come out. So whether it's the deep state or whoever it is coming out of their shadows to show their hand, their cards, or to elicit a certain response, whether it was the legislative branch coming out with more laws, forcing their hand, or the people rising up and saying certain things, wanting change and even voting in the midterms and what's coming up in the future. So let's see what happens, but I think we are at a good place. There's some fruit out of it. There's still other things we don't quite understand, but let's see what happens. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Love you guys. Talk to you guys very soon.